Chapter 7 Gadsden Purchase. It was the Gadsden Purchase that settled the main boundaries of the U.S. of America. The Louisiana Purchase of 50 years earlier, the biggest land sale in history, had transferred an area of 827,000 square miles between the Mississippi and the Rocky Mountains from French sovereignty to the U.S. The federal government went on to expand the borders by diplomacy, purchase, annexation, and war. Florida was mopped up in 1819. In 1836, the American settlers in Texas threw off the yoke of Mexico and declared their independence. And despite the Alamo, they made it stick. In 1844, James K. Polk was elected president. A strong believer in America's manifest destiny, a phrase first used the following year in relation to Texas, which was mentioned in Chapter 1. He settled matters with Britain over the border with Canada and made the 49th parallel the accepted boundary in the north. Meanwhile, in 1845, he had annexed Texas and offered to buy California, and was not noticeably displeased to go to war when the Mexican government demurred. The Americans defeated the Mexican army in a succession of battles, took Mexico City, and forced the Mexicans to surrender. The war was not to taste of all Americans by any means, and the Massachusetts legislature considered a war of conquest and a crime. On the other hand, there were senators calling for the conquest and annexation of the whole of Mexico. President Polk demurred at that, but the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo of 1848 firmly gave the U.S. 500,000 square miles of additional territory. California and much of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, and Nevada, in return for a payment of $15 million. Mexico accepted the laws of Texas, and the line of the Rio Grande and the Gila River became the international border in the south. President Polk was not satisfied and complained that he would have demanded more land if he had been given the chance. The new territory needed to be developed, and there were rebel plans for a transcontinental railroad to the Pacific coast, including one to run along the 32nd parallel from Texas to California. This was a comparatively cheap road, but it would need to dip south of the Gila River. Its advantages were pressed by Jefferson Davis, Secretary of War to President Franklin Pierce, and his friend James Gadsden, President of the South Carolina Railroad and a former Army officer who had been involved in the forcible removal of the Seminole Indians from Florida to make room for white settlement. In 1853, President Pierce sent Gadsden to Mexico to negotiate a redefinition of the border. The Mexican regime was urgently in need of money, and for $10 million sold the required strip of territory south of the River, in what is now southern New Mexico and Arizona. It was only a mere 30,000 square miles, about the size of Scotland, but it was the country through which the Southern Pacific Railroad would be built. The project was delayed by the Civil War. Nicholas P. Huntington, the practical self-made Californian tycoon, drove the railroad from LA east through desert country to El Paso, San Antonio, and New Orleans in the 1870s and 80s. In July 1853, President Franklin Pierce instructed James Gadsden, minister to Mexico, to make a treaty not only settling the issues involved, but also securing enough territory for the proposed Southern Railroad route. Financial needs of the administration of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna aided negotiation of a treaty whereby territory in northern Mexico was sold to the U.S. The Gadsden Treaty, as it became known, abrogated article of the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, but the U.S. was to aid in suppressing Indian depredations. For these concessions, the U.S. would pay Mexico $15 million and assume all claims of its citizens against Mexico. Including the Hargos claim, the U.S. promised to cooperate in suppressing Federalist expeditions. The treaty met strong opposition in the Senate. where anti-slavery senators condemned further acquisition of slave territory. Lobbying by spectators worsened the treaty's reputation. Some senators objected to furnishing Santa Anna financial assistance. The Senate, by narrow margin, ratified the treaty on April 25, 1854, but only after reducing the territory to be acquired to that considered essential for the railroad route. The Senate also deleted all mention of pirate claims and bill-bursting expeditions. The payment to Mexico was lowered to $10 million, and the Senate inserted an article promising American protection to the sloop grantees. A combination of the advocates of the Southern Railroad route and the friends of the sloop grant made ratification possible. By the Gadsden Treaty, the U.S. secured 45,535 square miles of territory. This tract became known as the Gadsden Purchase today and encompasses the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico. Here's a map of the Gadsden Purchase. Although it was a small part, it was still important to the U.S. because it provided a viable route for a southern transcontinental railroad from El Paso in the far west of Texas to Los Angeles, California on the Pacific coast. Chapter 8. Later development. Here is the timeline of all the important events happened during the Westward expansion. 1767. Daniel Boone explored Kentucky for the first time. 1803. Louisiana Purchase, mentioned in Chapter 2. 1805. Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean. 1830. Indian Removal Act. 1836. Battle of the Alamo. 1838. Trail of Tears, caused by the Indian Removal Act. 1841. As mentioned in Chapter 5. 1845. Manifest Destiny, as mentioned in Chapter 1. 1845. Texas became a U.S. state, as mentioned in Chapter 4. 1846. 1846. Brigham Young leads 5,000 Mormons to Utah. 1846 to 1848. The Mexican-American War. 1846. Oregon Treaty, in Chapter 5. 1848. Gold Rush begins. 1849. Around 90,000 49ers moved to California to find gold. See a gold rush. 1860. The Pony Express began to deliver mail. 1861. The first transcontinental telegraph line is finished. The Pony Express shuts down. 1862. Pacific Railroad Act. 1862. Homestead Act. 1869. The Transcontinental Railroad is complete. 1872. Yellowstone National Park is made. 1874. Black Hills Gold. 1874. Barbed wire invented. 1876. Wild Bill Hickok is shot. 1876. Battle of Little Bighorn. 1890. The U.S. government announces that the western lands have been explored. The U.S. continued to expand in size and wealth in different directions. In the mid-19th century, the quest for control of the West led to the annexation of Texas and the Mexican-American War. President James Polk's administration was a period of intensive expansion for the U.S. After overseeing the final details regarding the annexation of Texas from Mexico, Polk negotiated a peaceful settlement with Britain regarding ownership of the Oregon Country, which delivered the U.S. to what are now Washington and Oregon. The acquisition of additional lands from Mexico, a country many in the U.S. perceived as weak and inferior, was not so bloodless and culminated in the Mexican-American War. After U.S. victory, the Mexican section added nearly half of Mexico's territory to the U.S., including New Mexico and California, and established the U.S.-Mexico border at the Rio Grande. The California Gold Rush of 1849 rapidly expanded the population of the new territory, which also prompted concerns over immigration, especially from China. Efforts to seize Western territories from native people and expand the republic by warring with Mexico succeeded beyond expectations. Few nations had ever expanded so quickly. However, this expansion led to debates over the fate of slavery in the West. Increasingly, the South came to regard itself as under attack by radical Northern abolitionists, and many Northerners began to speak ominously of a Southern drive to dominate U.S. policies for the purpose of protecting slaveholders' human property. As tensions mounted and both sides hurled accusations, national unity frayed. Compromise became nearly impossible, and antagonistic sectional rivalries replaced the idea of a unified democratic republic. Tensions between the North and South ultimately led to the collapse of American democracy and a brutal civil war. If you would like to learn about what happened after the westward expansion of the U.S., remember to read the next book in the series. Chapter 9, Quiz. If you would like to quiz your knowledge, please go play the Manifest Destiny trivia game. Remember to read the next book. Westward Expansion, written by Elizabeth, illustrated by Linda, is read by Elizabeth Hone. Also, please scan this QR code to access to this audiobook. Thank you for reading.